Hey there. Today, we delve into one of the most revolutionary and elusive chapters of aviation history, the emergence of the German jet fighter that threatened to shift the balance of World War II skies forever. Imagine spotting a sleek, propellerless missile streaking past at over 500 miles per hour, with no warning and no chance for interception. What if a fighter squadron, flying in tight formation above the Netherlands, suddenly witnesses a deadly spear racing downward, an apparition of unmatched speed and design? Could this be the long-rumored wonder weapon the Germans promised? An aircraft that would forever change aerial combat? And then, in a shocking turn, the first enemy jet is shot down by gunfire, exposing its supposed invincibility as vulnerable during critical takeoff and landing moments. How did Allied pilots learn to turn this technological marvel into a fragile target? Could a daring attack on a German jet base, launched from below the clouds, really destroy multiple aircraft in minutes? And what does this all mean for the future of aerial warfare? In this video, we will trace the rise and fall of the German Me-262. The aircraft that promised dominance but revealed alarming vulnerabilities, uncovering how tactical ingenuity, relentless courage, and strategic adaptation ultimately decided its fate. The story begins now, as we explore the daring exploits, deadly weaknesses, and lasting lessons of the jet age's first true game-changer. On the 5th of October in the year 1944, high above the skies near Asselt, a small village nestled within the Netherlands, a remarkable event was unfolding that would soon echo through the annals of aviation history. A squadron of 5 pilots from the Royal Canadian Air Force's No. 401 Squadron was maneuvering their Spitfire Mark 9 fighters in a tight formation, circling at a high altitude beneath the expansive afternoon sky. The sunlight reflected off the sleek, polished surfaces of their aircraft, creating a dazzling display of silver gleam as they maintained their watchful vigil. It was during this tense moment that Squadron Leader Smith was the first to catch sight of an extraordinary object streaking through the air, something that defied the normal expectations of wartime aerial combat. His keen eyes observed a narrow, silvery shape hurtling downward toward the town of Nijmegen at an almost impossible speed. Unlike the familiar profiles of the propeller-driven fighters they were accustomed to, this object bore no propeller, no traditional aircraft silhouette, only a streamlined missile of metal racing past at a velocity that seemed beyond any previous experience. The craft's form was more akin to a swift, deadly spear piercing through the sky, an apparition that stunned the Canadian pilots. As the sleek, unorthodox craft banked sharply, a trail of faint exhaust wisps drifted behind it against the backdrop of a purple-tinged sky, a vivid reminder of the power surging within. For 3 long years, rumors and whispers from Allied intelligence circles had hinted at the Germans developing a new kind of aircraft, one powered by jet engines that promised to revolutionize aerial combat. Yet, such rumors had always been dismissed as mere speculation or propaganda. Now, however, this mysterious speedster was clearly a tangible reality, screaming past the Canadian fighters at over 500 miles per hour, an almost incomprehensible velocity for that era. Captain Smith swiftly reached for his radio, issuing urgent commands to his squadron. He relayed the position of the enemy aircraft to Flight Lieutenant Davenport, Flight Lieutenant Everard, Flying Officer Mai, and Flying Officer Sinclair, ordering them into attack formations. The air was suddenly charged with a new urgency, as the pilots prepared themselves for a confrontation unlike any they had previously encountered. What happened next would mark a pivotal moment in aviation history. The first confirmed shoot-down of an enemy jet fighter by gunfire in air-to-air combat. More significantly, This event shattered the myth of the German aircraft's invincibility, which had been propagated through aggressive wartime propaganda. The sleek, deadly Messerschmitt Me 262 Schwabel, often heralded by the Germans as a wonder weapon, had just revealed its critical vulnerability to the determined Allied fighters. This was the beginning of a new chapter in aerial warfare, where the technological marvels of the enemy would no longer be beyond the reach of Allied ingenuity. In the months that followed, American pilots flying P-51 Mustangs would learn to exploit this vulnerability systematically. They developed specialized tactics and formation strategies designed to hunt down and neutralize the Me 262, effectively turning what was once thought to be an unstoppable aircraft into a near ineffective threat despite its cutting-edge technology. The psychological impact of witnessing the first jet fighter being shot down rippled across the ranks of Allied airmen and commanders alike, instilling a newfound confidence and urgency in their operations over Europe. Those pilots who had observed the German jets in action understood immediately that the nature of air combat had undergone a fundamental transformation. For example, Captain Chuck Jagger of the 357th Fighter Group, stationed at RAF Lyon, listened attentively to intelligence briefings and recognized the profound implications. He noted that the Me 262 could achieve speeds of approximately 540 miles per hour in level flight, a figure significantly surpassing the maximum speed of the P-51 Mustang, which was around 437 miles per hour. A difference that made a direct chase almost impossible. In a straightforward pursuit, the Me 262 was simply uncatchable with the existing tactics and aircraft of the Allies. The raw mathematics of aerodynamics and velocity made it clear that unless the Allied forces could develop new strategies or aircraft, the Germans could leverage this technological advantage to devastating effect. Should the Luftwaffe deploy these jets in significant numbers, equipped with sufficient fuel and flown by well-trained pilots, the strategic bombing campaigns targeted at German industry and infrastructure could face catastrophic setbacks. For instance, the massive B-17 Flying Fortress bombers, lumbering through skies thick with anti-aircraft fire at speeds around 180 miles per hour, would become vulnerable prey. Easy targets for agile, fast-moving jets capable of attacking from any angle and retreating before their escort fighters could effectively respond. It was the first time since the Allies had gained air superiority over Europe that the possibility of losing that dominance loomed on the horizon, casting a shadow of uncertainty over their strategic plans. However, the revolutionary design of the Me 262 also carried inherent vulnerabilities, which stemmed from the very nature during the intense circumstances of aerial combat. The engines that powered the revolutionary Messerschmitt Me 262 faced significant operational challenges, particularly with regard to their durability and responsiveness under wartime conditions. The Jumo 004B engines, which were at the heart of this pioneering aircraft, required meticulous maintenance and frequent replacements. After approximately 10 hours of active flying time, these engines typically needed overhauling. In more severe cases, complete engine replacements became necessary after roughly 25 hours of service, meaning that in the span of just 3 or 4 combat sorties, each lasting around an hour, the aircraft's power plants were often exhausted and required urgent replacement or heavy repairs. This relentless wear and tear presented a logistical nightmare for the German air forces, which struggled to keep up with the supply demands of such rapid engine turnover, a challenge that ground crews could never fully surmount during the chaos of wartime. Adding to the aircraft's operational difficulties was the nature of the engine's throttle response, which created immediate tactical problems. Unlike traditional piston engines, which could respond to throttle inputs almost instantaneously, the Jumo 004B was plagued by a noticeable delay in power adjustment. This sluggish response meant that pilots could not simply advance or reduce the throttle quickly without risking significant consequences. For instance, if a pilot pushed the throttle forward too rapidly, the engine would inject an excess of fuel into the combustion chambers before airflow could sufficiently increase, leading to a rapid spike in turbine and jet pipe temperatures. Such overheating could cause turbine blades to become dangerously hot, risking catastrophic failure of the power plant. As a result, pilots had to exercise extraordinary care when manipulating the throttle, making slow, deliberate adjustments and patiently waiting for the engines to stabilize before proceeding. During combat situations where split-second decisions often determined life or death, this slow throttle response turned the Me-262 from a potential aerial dominance into a vulnerable target. Its inability to react swiftly to pilot input meant that in critical moments, such as during evasion or attack run adjustments, the aircraft's sluggishness could be exploited by enemy fighters. The specific takeoff and landing procedures of the Me-262 further exposed these vulnerabilities, transforming what should have been tactical advantages into perilous phases of flight. The aircraft's high wing loading, measured at approximately 294 kilograms per square meter, was substantially greater than that of contemporary piston fighters, requiring a takeoff speed exceeding about 110 miles per hour and similar speeds for a safe and controlled landing. In the crucial initial moments after releasing the brakes to take off, the Me-262 faced a demanding acceleration phase that could last close to 30 seconds. During this period, the aircraft would roll down the runway, attempting to reach its necessary flying speed while its engines, hampered by low airspeed conditions, struggled to produce adequate thrust. For nearly half a minute, the aircraft was essentially helpless, unable to maneuver effectively or evade threats, moving straight ahead at a predictable velocity and with little ability to change course. This vulnerability meant that any Allied fighter intercepting the Me-262 during takeoff had an almost stationary target, incapable of quick acceleration or evasive action. The aircraft's limited agility at low speeds, compounded by its high takeoff and landing speeds, made it an easy mark for enemy fighters. The problems persisted during landing as well, as pilots descended toward their airfields after missions that could last from 60 to 90 minutes, during which they would have burned through most of their fuel. They faced the challenge of slowing down from high speeds while configuring the aircraft's flaps and landing gear. This phase of flight, which demanded careful control and precise handling, again exposed the aircraft's inherent weaknesses at low airspeed. The Me-262, which was designed to excel at high velocities and altitudes, became highly predictable during these critical moments, flying straight and level at high speed, thus presenting an easy target for enemy fighters waiting in the vicinity. The very jet engines that provided the Me-262 with unmatched performance at high altitude and high speed proved to be a liability during these low-speed phases of flight. Their reliance on specialized fuel, J-2 fuel, which was available only at designated military facilities, further constrained operational flexibility. Intelligence agencies, particularly the 8th Air Force's analysis units based in England, systematically studied these issues during the late summer and early fall of the year 1944. Reconnaissance missions utilizing aerial photography identified the locations of Me-262 bases at Amma, Hepe, Rena, Lechfeld, and Munich Re, providing valuable intelligence on the aircraft's operational patterns and vulnerabilities. Close examination of gun camera footage from the few aerial encounters with the Me-262 revealed a dual nature. While the aircraft's high-speed capabilities gave it a decisive advantage during interception and dash attacks, its low-speed performance was notably inferior. The analysis showed that after engaging in high-speed combat and burning through much of their fuel, Me-262 pilots were forced to return to these specific bases, as they lacked the fuel and resources to divert to alternative landing sites. The scarcity of the specialized J-2 fuel meant that they could not simply land at any. The sudden emergence of jet fighters over the European theater fundamentally altered the dynamics of aerial combat. These sleek, turbojet-powered aircraft, capable of reaching vastly higher speeds than their piston-engine counterparts, posed a strategic challenge that the Allies and Axis alike struggled to address. One of the most pressing issues was the vulnerability of these advanced jets during critical phases of their operation, specifically during takeoff and landing. Unlike the swift, maneuverable fighters that could intercept enemy aircraft in the air, the jet's most exposed moments came when it was stationary on the ground or maneuvering during takeoff and landing. Recognizing this weakness, Allied pilots and strategists devised tactics to exploit these vulnerable windows, turning them into opportunities for effective countermeasures. The geographic constraints of the region further shaped the tactical landscape. With the majority of jet bases situated in specific, well-known locations within Germany, it became possible for daring propeller-driven fighters to position themselves nearby. If these fighters could patiently loiter in proximity to these bases, remaining within reach without consuming excessive fuel, they could launch surprise attacks exactly when the jets were most exposed, during their takeoff or landing phases. This approach required a combination of endurance, patience, and courageous pilots willing to navigate into heavily defended airspace, where German anti-aircraft defenses and interceptor fighters were at their most vigilant. Yet, it proved to be one of the only reliable methods for Allied propeller aircraft to stand a chance against the more technologically advanced jets, which otherwise held the clear advantage in speed and altitude. The German Luftwaffe, quick to recognize the threat posed by the jet fighters, responded with equally aggressive defensive measures. They established elaborate defensive networks along the approach corridors leading to the Me-262 jet bases. These corridors were fortified with extensive anti-aircraft artillery, ranging from large 88mm guns to rapid-firing 37mm autocannons, complemented by quad 20mm systems, forming formidable curtains of fire that any attacking fighter had to penetrate. To bolster their defenses during the critical moments of jet takeoff and landing, the Germans assigned their most advanced piston-engine fighters, such as the formidable Focke-Wulf FW190D, Fulhoff-Wulf, and the rarer Tar 152H, to provide immediate top cover, creating a protective umbrella over their vulnerable jets. In an effort to complicate Allied attack patterns further, German command implemented unpredictable tactics. Flight schedules were often randomized to prevent Allied pilots from predicting the exact timing of jet departures. Some bases even deployed decoy aircraft, simulated or real, to lure attacking fighters into well-prepared anti-aircraft ambushes, often called flak traps. Additionally, to reduce the risk of losing their precious jets to Allied fighters before they could take to the skies, the Germans adapted their field operations. They converted nearby structures, such as the Autobahn, a type of aircraft maintenance and storage facility, into emergency landing strips. These strips were camouflaged with foliage and hidden within forests, allowing Me-262s to operate from concealed locations that Allied intelligence agencies had yet to identify, thereby extending their operational range and complicating Allied reconnaissance efforts. Despite these sophisticated defensive strategies, A persistent and fundamental tactical problem remained unresolved: the inherent vulnerability of the Me-262s during the critical phases of takeoff and landing. No matter how well protected the aircraft were during their flight, they were essentially defenseless during these brief but crucial moments. They lacked the speed and agility necessary to defend themselves effectively against determined interception or ground fire. It was during this era that Lieutenant Urban Drew, a young pilot from Detroit, became acutely familiar with this deadly vulnerability. Drew, only 21 years old, had already encountered a jet fighter in combat during a previous sortie, and he had submitted detailed intelligence reports describing the aircraft's capabilities and weaknesses. His expertise was put to the test on October 7, in the year of 1944, when he found himself grounded and facing disciplinary action for an unauthorized victory rule, an aerial display of triumph, after a successful mission. However, the disciplinary threat evaporated almost immediately upon the receipt of intelligence indicating a concentration of Me-262 jets at a base called Acma Aerodrome in northwestern Germany. Recognizing his previous encounters with the jet and understanding the terrain and defenses around the base, Drew was singled out as the ideal candidate to lead a daring fighter sweep aimed at destroying those jets on the ground. With meticulous preparation, Drew briefed his flight, emphasizing that their success depended heavily on maintaining the element of surprise, fighting with aggressive audacity, and being willing to accept the significant risks involved in penetrating German flak defenses. His wingman, Second Lieutenant Robert McCandless, was committed to sticking with him regardless of the dangers they faced. On that October afternoon, Drew's P-51 Mustang, coded E-2D, and affectionately nicknamed Detroit Miss, roared to life on the runway at RAF Little Walden, fully fueled and with wing tanks filled to capacity, granting him nearly 4 hours of operational endurance as the aircraft prepared for takeoff. Tension filled the air. Drew steadily pushed the throttle forward, feeling the engine respond with increased power as he entered a steep dive. His aircraft rapidly gained speed, shedding altitude with relentless momentum, the roar of the engine echoing through the skies. Meanwhile, the Me-262's jets lined up on the runway, their engines already spooling for launch, poised to take to the air in a swift and deadly attack run. Just as Drew's mighty Mustang roared past the 400 miles per hour mark in its descent, the lead jet, piloted by Oberfeldwebel Heinz Arnold, began its own takeoff rule. Arnold's aircraft, a sleek and formidable Me-262s, had probably only just reached around 80 miles per hour when Drew suddenly opened fire from a distance of approximately 800 yards. His twin 650 caliber machine guns tracked the rapidly accelerating target, their tracers streaking across the sky in deadly arcs, converging on the speeding jet. The tracers found their mark, walking up the runway and piercing the right engine of Arnold's Me-262. The impact caused a violent jolt as the engine disintegrated in a fiery explosion, sending shrapnel and flames spiraling outward. Despite the catastrophic failure, Arnold's jet was already traveling too fast for an immediate abort, and the aircraft staggered into the air on what remained of its single engine. It was painfully clear that the plane was utterly unable to sustain altitude or gain speed. Drew closed the gap to about 400 yards and unleashed another burst of gunfire. This time, the rounds struck near the cockpit, and sparks erupted along the fuselage, signaling severe damage. Arnold's Me-262 suddenly rolled inverted, spiraling downward as it lost control. The jet plunged into the trees beside the runway, exploding upon impact in a fiery ball of wreckage. Meanwhile, the second Me-262, flown by Lieutenant Gerd Kaubert, had watched the destruction of Arnold's aircraft and immediately attempted to abort its own takeoff. However, the jet's sluggish throttle response and high landing speed made it impossible to decelerate quickly enough. The aircraft was still rolling at high speed, dangerously close to the end of the runway, when Drew, having just completed his first strafing run, pulled his aircraft up sharply and repositioned for another attack run. McCandless, his wingman, issued urgent warnings about incoming flak as German gunners, alerted by the chaos, began firing with deadly precision. Shells of 88 mm burst around the attacking Mustangs in ominous black puffs, signaling the deadly range of the enemy's artillery. Despite the deadly barrage, Drew pressed on, ignoring the deadly flak. He dove again, his aircraft carving through the sky in a tight, controlled descent. From high above, he unleashed a long, sustained burst of fire into Cobbert's Me-262 as it struggled to turn off the runway. The bullets found their marks along the fuselage and both engines, causing sparks, smoke, and flames to erupt. The jet slowed dramatically, then suddenly burst into a blazing inferno as its fuel tanks ignited, sending a deadly fireball into the sky. Cobbert managed to eject from the burning wreckage, escaping with his life, but his aircraft was a total loss, completely destroyed by Drew's precise and relentless attack. In less than 2 minutes, Drew had managed to eliminate 2 of Germany's most advanced jet fighters, employing tactics that would soon become standard operational procedure for Allied pilots. This fierce engagement proved conclusively that even the most advanced technological innovations, like the Me-262, were vulnerable during critical phases of flight, such as takeoff and attack. It demonstrated that aggressive tactics, combined with impeccable timing and precision, could neutralize even the most formidable enemy aircraft. The battle underscored a vital lesson. Superior technology alone could not guarantee victory if not paired with tactical ingenuity and daring. However, despite the severity of his actions and the apparent success, Drew's gun camera malfunctioned during the attack, preventing him from capturing photographic evidence of his victories. His sole witness, Mandless, had been hit by flak during their escape from Acma and was shot down, becoming a prisoner of war before he could verify Drew's claims. Without visual proof or eyewitness testimony, the headquarters of the 8th Air Force initially refused to credit Drew with the victories, which was an immense disappointment considering the significance of the tactical achievement. It was only after nearly 4 decades that Drew's accomplishments received official acknowledgement. In 1983, a thorough cross-referencing of German Luftwaffe archives with American records revealed the truth. The archives confirmed that Drew had indeed destroyed both of the enemy jets, an extraordinary feat, and that his claims were well-founded. The confirmation came from the Luftwaffe ace Georg Peter Ed, who had been scheduled to lead the Me-262 formation that day but experienced mechanical issues with his aircraft, preventing him from participating actively. From the ground, Ed witnessed on May 12 of the year 1983, a remarkable event took place in the history of aerial combat recognition. Drew was officially honored by the United States Air Force with the prestigious Air Force Cross, an award bestowed for acts of extraordinary heroism in aerial operations. The presentation ceremony was conducted with great pomp and significance, with the Secretary of the Air Force at the time, Vern Orr, personally handing over the decoration to Drew. To mark the importance of this occasion, Drew and his wife were flown from Johannesburg, a major city in South Africa, to the United States specifically for the ceremony. The aircraft that transported them was a C-141 Starlifter, a military transport aircraft known for its capability to carry personnel across vast distances efficiently. This journey underscored the significance of Drew's achievements and the recognition he received for his extraordinary bravery and combat skill. Drew's accomplishment was especially notable because he remains the only Allied pilot known to have downed 2 enemy jet aircraft during a single combat mission while flying a propeller-driven fighter. A feat that exemplifies exceptional skill and daring in aerial warfare. His daring exploits set a unique benchmark in the annals of military aviation, highlighting the extraordinary capabilities of pilots operating aircraft that, by design, were often considered inferior to the faster, more technologically advanced jets of the enemy. The events of October 7, 1944, add a layer of historical intrigue and uncertainty. On that day, Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Zemper, a seasoned fighter leader of the 479th Fighter Group within the 8th Air Force, may have achieved another notable victory against a Messerschmitt Me-262, the renowned German jet fighter. However, the final confirmation remains elusive, leaving some ambiguity about the true outcome of that engagement. ZMP, as he was known among his peers, was among the most experienced and respected fighter leaders in the 8th Air Force. During a mission flown over Germany, he engaged what he believed to be a Bf-109, another prominent German fighter aircraft. However, his gun camera footage, which was supposed to provide clear evidence of the kill, was ambiguous. The footage showed an aircraft that could have been either a Messerschmitt 109 or an Me-262, leading analysts after the war to suggest that it was more likely the jet fighter that ZMP had engaged. Despite this post-war analysis, the victory was never conclusively confirmed, leaving a question mark over this particular combat incident. More significant than the specifics of any single victory claim was the broader pattern that these engagements revealed. American fighter pilots, despite facing the formidable speed and technological superiority of the Me-262, began to understand that defeating these jets was possible through tactical ingenuity. The key to success lay in refusing to engage the Me-262s in their preferred environment. That is, in high-altitude, high-speed dogfights where their speed advantage was most pronounced. Instead, American pilots learned to steer combat into phases where the jet's speed advantage was diminished and where they could exploit their own aircraft's strengths during less predictable, more vulnerable moments. This strategic adaptation was crucial in countering the threat posed by the revolutionary German jets. A key example of this tactical evolution occurred exactly 1 month later, on November 6, 1944. Chuck Jagger, a dedicated and resourceful pilot, encountered his first Me-262 during a bomber escort mission near Akma, a location in Germany. At the time, Jagger was flying a P-51 Mustang, a highly capable propeller-driven fighter, which he had named Glamorous Glen 3, in honor of his wife, Glennice. As Jagger's aircraft maintained patrol altitude, he spotted the sleek, formidable shape of Me-262 jets attempting to intercept the formation of bombers he was tasked with protecting. The German jets executed their typical attack run, diving through the bomber stream at extraordinary speed, firing a brief burst of gunfire, then using their velocity advantage to climb steeply back to their cruising altitude before American escort fighters could effectively respond. This pattern was characteristic of the jets' tactics, showcasing their superior speed and agility. Despite the conventional wisdom that chasing after Me-262s was a hopeless endeavor, Jagger made a calculated decision that defied standard doctrine. He understood that, given their limited fuel capacity, the jets had to land eventually, and their fuel endurance was a critical weakness. They couldn't stay airborne indefinitely, especially if pursued persistently. Recognizing this, He broke away from the bomber formation and descended through the clouds, emerging at a lower altitude near Acma Airfield. Below him, Jagger observed a solitary Me-262 in the landing pattern, with its landing gear and flaps extended, indicating it was preparing for landing. The jet's speed had been reduced to approximately 150 miles per hour as it aligned with the runway on its final approach. The German pilot, heavily focused on his landing task, seemingly failed to notice the Mustang closing in from above and behind. Seizing the opportunity during a tense and perilous air encounter, an aircraft abruptly rolled inverted and plummeted into the dense woods several hundred feet short of the designated runway threshold, detonating in a fierce explosion that illuminated the forest with a blazing ball of orange flame. Despite the chaos and destruction unfolding before him, Jagger realized that celebration was the last thing on his mind. Survival was the immediate priority. As the chaos unfolded, Acma's defensive anti-aircraft batteries responded instantly, unleashing a barrage of 88mm shells that burst violently around Jagger's Mustang fighter aircraft. The enemy fire rained down as he streaked across the airfield at incredible speed, flying at treetop altitude to avoid incoming rounds. Faced with a deadly barrage, Jagger's only viable strategy was to fly directly down the runway, leveraging maximum speed to escape before the flak crews could recalibrate their aim. Tracers from both sides arced through the air, illuminating the chaos as bullets whistled past the aircraft. In the confusion, some of the pursuing rounds from one side surprisingly struck enemy gun positions on the opposite side, a testament to the unpredictable nature of the melee. Despite the overwhelming barrage, Jagger maintained his course low and fast, pushing his aircraft to its limits. He cleared the far end of the airfield and, with a decisive pull of the control stick, executed a sharp, hard climb into a nearby valley, seeking the safety of the terrain below. His survival in this scenario marked one of the most dangerous tactical feats in aerial combat, attacking an enemy airfield during daylight hours at low altitude. This daring maneuver also demonstrated a vital truth. Me-262 jet fighters could be hunted, attacked, and ultimately destroyed despite their technological advantage. Later, Jagger would describe this engagement with a sense of characteristic understatement, reflecting his pragmatic attitude. He simply stated, "First time I saw a jet, I shot it down." Although perhaps not the most sportsmanlike approach, he shrugged off the criticism with a casual, "But what the hell?" Throughout the late years of the Second World War, particularly from late 1944 into 1945, American fighter pilots refined their tactics for combating jet aircraft based on rigorous combat experience and meticulous analysis of gun camera footage. These lessons learned in the crucible of battle allowed for increasingly effective countermeasures against the technologically advanced German jets. The P-51 Mustang proved to be an ideal aircraft for this specialized role primarily because of its exceptional range and endurance capabilities. When fully fueled internally and equipped with 2 wingdrop tanks, a Mustang could remain airborne for over 7 hours, giving pilots the ability to loiter near known jet bases for extended periods, an essential advantage in intercepting fast-moving targets. When jets appeared, Mustang pilots often exploited their altitude advantage, diving from high altitude to attack, effectively trading height for speed in a calculated effort to catch the elusive enemy. During these rapid dives, a P-51 could briefly surpass speeds of approximately 500 miles per hour, a velocity sufficient to intercept and engage Me-262 jets during their most vulnerable moments, such as during takeoff or landing. Timing was crucial in these attacks. Engaging jets during their takeoff rule required early detection and precise positioning before they gained enough speed for effective flight. Conversely, attacking during a jet's landing approach demanded patience, waiting for the precise moment when the aircraft was committed to its descent, with gear and flaps extended, offering a vulnerable profile. American fighter pilots developed an intimate understanding of Me-262 operational patterns through persistent observation and intelligence analysis. They learned that these jets often operated during specific windows, usually in the morning hours and late afternoon, when visibility was optimal. However, the angles of the sun during these times sometimes posed challenges for visual acquisition, making detection more difficult for defenders. Pilots also observed that German pilots rarely flew alone. Instead, Me-262s typically operated in pairs or small formations. This insight was crucial, as destroying one jet often opened opportunities to attack others within the same formation. The enemy's operational limitations, especially their fuel constraints, also played a significant role. Because they couldn't afford to wave off landings and attempt to go around for another approach, once an Me-262 committed to landing with low fuel, that aircraft had little choice but to continue despite threats from above. This psychological pressure heavily favored attacking Mustang pilots. Knowing that the jet pilot was exposed during the final approach, and unable to abort, gave the attacking fighter a distinct advantage. The jet pilot's awareness of this vulnerability meant that once he committed to landing, he was essentially trapped, an easy target for a well-timed attack. Confident in this knowledge, Mustang pilots could press their attacks with a degree of assurance, knowing that their target was highly vulnerable during these critical moments of its operational cycle. The aircraft, despite their formidable speed and technological advancements, could not suddenly accelerate in a manner that would allow them to break free from the relentless pursuit. Over time, the defensive systems of the Luftwaffe became increasingly refined and complex in an effort to counter these relentless tactics. However, underlying structural vulnerabilities persisted, vulnerabilities that no amount of technological ingenuity could fully eliminate. As a result, the airfield defenses grew denser and more intricate, with some approach corridors guarded by an array of more than 100 guns of various calibers, designed to create a lethal maze for any attacking force. The level of fighter escort also intensified, with specially assigned pilots flying aircraft such as the FW-190D and the TA-152H, tasked explicitly with engaging Allied fighters near jet operations bases, regardless of the prevailing tactical situation. These pilots were under strict orders to seek out and confront enemy fighters whenever possible, aiming to disrupt and weaken the Allied air offensive. Meanwhile, pilots operating the Me-262s received instructions to vary their approach patterns significantly. They were told to perform unpredictable maneuvers, including arbitrary turns and altitude fluctuations, in an effort to complicate interception efforts by Allied fighters. In some instances, airfields resorted to deploying smoke generators during landing operations to obscure the field from enemy observation and targeting, adding another layer of difficulty for attacking forces. Nevertheless, these defensive measures could not alter the fundamental reality of warfare physics and logistics. The Me-262s required specific bases equipped with designated fuel supplies, as their operational endurance was limited to only a few minutes of flight time before they needed to land and refuel. Allied fighters could saturate the airspace surrounding these jet bases, making encounters during takeoff or landing almost unavoidable and often decisive. This unavoidable exposure meant that, despite the Germans' best efforts, the vulnerability of the jets during critical phases of flight remained a persistent threat. One of the most notable and devastating examples of these tactics occurred on February 25, in the year of 1945, when the Mustang fighters of the 55th Fighter Group launched a surprise attack on the German jet base at Geilstadt during a critical takeoff window. The timing of this assault was impeccable. American P-51 Mustangs arrived just as multiple Me-262 jets began their takeoff procedures. In the ensuing chaos, the American pilots managed to destroy 6 of the jets either on the ground or during their initial departure, while several others sustained damage. These losses represented a significant portion of the operational jet fleet available to that unit, profoundly impacting their operational readiness. Historical records from the German side reveal that these Me-262s belonged to the ill-fated Kampfgeschwader 54, a bomber unit that had been re-equipped with jet aircraft in an attempt to prolong its effectiveness. Unfortunately, this unit's pilots lacked the sufficient fighter training and combat experience needed to maximize the potential of their new aircraft. The attack by the 55th Fighter Group demonstrated that well-coordinated and concentrated fighter sweeps targeted at jet bases during known operational periods could yield dramatic results. However, such strikes carried considerable risk, as they required precise timing and the element of surprise to succeed. During the engagement, several Mustangs sustained damage from defensive fire, underscoring the perilous nature of such operations. The overall tactical success hinged on achieving complete surprise, and this element was often the deciding factor in whether the attack would succeed or fail. The psychological impact of these losses on the German jet pilots was profound and accumulated over time. The Me-262 pilots were among the elite of the Luftwaffe, carefully selected, extensively trained, and often veterans with significant combat experience. They initially approached their missions with a justified confidence rooted in their aircraft's advanced technology and superior performance. Yet, the repeated losses during takeoff and landing phases gradually eroded their confidence, instilling a sense of dread associated with these critical moments of flight. Pilots became acutely aware that once they committed to a takeoff or landing, escape was not always an option. The constant threat of ambush from Allied fighters, combined with the knowledge that once on the ground or in the air, their movement might be swiftly curtailed, weighed heavily on their minds. The psychological toll was compounded by the fact that fuel gauges often indicated tanks nearing empty, adding an ominous element of risk and urgency. Such mental stress directly affected pilot performance and decision-making. During these perilous phases of flight, the raid on Berlin conducted on March 18, in the year of 1945, vividly exemplified both the potential of the Me-262 and the limits of its strategic impact. Despite its technological superiority, the jet could not fundamentally alter the course of the war. During this operation, a total of 1,221 Allied bombers, escorted by a formidable force of 632 fighters, launched a comprehensive attack on the German capital. The skies over Germany on that fateful day marked what would be remembered as the final epic air clash of the war, a confrontation that epitomized the desperate last efforts of the Luftwaffe to stem the relentless tide of Allied dominance. Commanders assembled an impressive formation of 37 Me-262 jet fighters, which had been pulled from the factory in Yakushvada 7, specifically for a daring, coordinated assault aimed squarely at the massive formations of Allied bombers approaching their targets. This operation represented the largest single deployment of jet aircraft in a single mission up to that point, a testament to Germany's attempt to leverage its most advanced technology amidst the chaos of the waning war effort. Leading this audacious attack was Oberleutnant Gau Wegmann, who took his squadron into a loose formation as they advanced toward the oncoming bomber fleet. In what was a historic moment for the Luftwaffe, Wegmann and his wingmen launched their R-4M unguided rockets for the very first time in active combat. These rockets, mounted in racks of 12 underneath each aircraft's wings, packed a 50mm explosive payload designed to detonate within close proximity to enemy aircraft, unleashing a devastating blast and shrapnel spread without the need for pinpoint accuracy. This innovative weapon aimed to maximize damage against the large formations of bombers by detonating amidst them, creating chaos and destruction through blast effects and fragmentation. As the attack unfolded, Wegmann's rockets ripped into a formation of 60 B-17 flying fortresses, with eyewitness reports indicating multiple bombers sustained hits and appeared to be falling out of formation. Meanwhile, other Me-262 pilots continued their assault using their standard armament, the potent 30mm cannons. Their remarkable speed allowed them to make several passes over the bomber formation in quick succession, evading the slower, less agile escort fighters for enough time to inflict significant damage before the enemy could respond effectively. The engagement was characterized by a brief but fierce exchange, a fleeting clash that nonetheless left a lasting impression of the Germans' daring tactics. German pilots, in their post-mission claims, asserted that they had shot down 12 bombers and a single fighter. However, contrasting official United States records revealed a more sobering reality. Only 8 heavy bombers had actually been lost, along with 3 Me-262 jets destroyed in combat. This discrepancy highlighted the common wartime phenomenon of overclaiming, often driven by the chaos of combat and the confusion inherent in aerial battles, where pilots tended to overestimate their kills. Even when accepting the German assertions at face value, it became clear that the jet's impact was minimal in the grand scheme. The claimed victories represented less than 1% of the overall attacking force, which continued its mission undeterred, reaching its target and unleashing its payload as planned. The strategic bombing campaign persisted with little interruption, and the overall effect of this particular attack was marginal at best. The toll on Allied personnel was tangible. 5 American fighter pilots failed to return from the engagement, and dozens of bomber crew members either lost their lives or fell into enemy captivity. Despite the limited tangible results, the operation was deemed a strategic success by the Allies, who viewed it as a demonstration of the jet fighter's potential and a sign of Germany's last-ditch efforts to employ their cutting-edge technology in combat. In the aftermath, Adolf Galland, a legendary fighter ace and former commander of the German fighter force who had been dismissed after disagreements with Hermann Göring over fighter tactics, took steps to reinforce Germany's remaining jet capabilities. In February of 1945, Galland established Jagdverband 44, an elite unit composed of Germany's most experienced and decorated aces, all flying the formidable Me-262. This unit's roster read like a roll call of Luftwaffe legends, featuring pilots with hundreds of aerial victories between them. Jagdverband 44 was granted priority access to the best aircraft, fuel supplies, and logistical support available, representing Germany's final earnest attempt to organize a substantial jet fighter force under conditions that could potentially give them a fighting chance. Galland himself actively participated in combat missions, scoring victories with both his cannons and the R-4M rockets, underscoring his commitment to defending Germany's skies until the bitter end. Other pilots within the unit reported successes against both heavy bombers and escort fighters when the tactical situation favored their jet-based combat techniques. Nevertheless, the operational life of Jagdverband 44 was tragically short-lived, measured merely in weeks rather than months. Continuous Allied bombing of their bases, along with relentless strategic airstrikes, forced the unit to relocate repeatedly, severely hampering operational capacity. Persistent shortages of fuel kept aircraft grounded for days at a time, and mechanical reliability issues, especially concerning the engines, meant that approximately half of the assigned jets were often unserviceable, awaiting spare parts or engine repairs. These factors vividly illustrated the stark contrast between the theoretical combat effectiveness of the Me-262 and the harsh realities of war during the course of the conflict. The Luftwaffe's jet fighter fleet was often hampered by maintenance issues or other operational setbacks, preventing a large portion of their aircraft from being available for combat at any given moment. Throughout the war, the number of Me-262s ready for combat at the same time never exceeded 50, and more typically, only around 25 aircraft were operational daily. This relatively small force was pitted against an overwhelming Allied aerial strength, which regularly comprised over 5,000 fighters and additional thousands of bombers in various stages of deployment and deployment readiness. Such a disparity in numbers made the prospect of victory in dogfights or strategic interceptions seem virtually insurmountable from a mathematical perspective, given the sheer quantitative advantage held by the Allies. Pilots flying the Me-262 claimed to have destroyed approximately 542 Allied aircraft in air-to-air combat, a figure that initially seemed promising. However, subsequent post-war analyses by American researchers revealed that these claims were heavily overestimated, a common phenomenon during wartime when both sides tend to inflate their victories. Careful examination of the records indicated that the actual number of Allied planes downed by Me-262s was significantly lower, especially when considering the rate at which Allied forces managed to shoot down these jets. In fact, Allied fighters and ground forces succeeded in destroying Me-262s at a pace that outstripped German production and training efforts, making it difficult for the Luftwaffe to sustain a formidable operational jet force. In terms of confirmed kills, American records credit the P-51 Mustangs with approximately 92.5 aircraft destroyed, a figure that encompasses not only air combat victories but also aircraft damaged on the ground, during takeoff, or during landing. The 357th Fighter Group, famously led by Chuck Jagger, was responsible for 18.5 confirmed jet kills, establishing itself as the leading American unit in jet combat. The 55th Fighter Group followed closely with 17 confirmed kills, while the 78th and the 339th Fighter Groups each claimed 15. British forces, operating Hawker Tempests and Spitfires, also contributed to the destruction of Me-262s, claiming about a dozen additional kills. When taken together, these figures show that the losses inflicted on the Me-262s by Allied forces exceeded the number of jets Germany was able to produce and deploy, resulting in a steady decline of the operational jet force despite continuous production efforts up until the country's surrender. Post-war interviews with German ace pilots who had flown the Me-262 reflect a mixed view of its combat effectiveness. Georg Peter Ida, who managed to score 12 kills including 9 P-51 Mustangs, acknowledged that the jet's remarkable top speed made it a relatively safe platform for high-altitude bomber intercepts. However, he also pointed out that Allied countermeasures and tactics gradually negated this speed advantage. Walter Dahl, credited with 11 jet victories, 6 of which were Mustangs, highlighted practical limitations such as fuel shortages and engine reliability issues. These factors constrained tactical flexibility, diminishing the jet's theoretical supremacy and rendering many of its supposed advantages moot during actual combat operations. Heinrich Bahr, with a total of 240 victories, including 16 Me-262 kills, stated plainly that the jet arrived too late in the war and in too limited numbers to make a significant impact on the overall outcome. France shall, the top probable ace with 17 kills, comprising 6 4-engine bombers and 10 P-51s, was killed in action in April of 1945. Earlier reports from Shell emphasized the aircraft's inability to effectively engage highly maneuverable enemy fighters, primarily because of its high approach speeds and broad turning radius. Nevertheless, the tactical insights gleaned from the operations of the Me-262 significantly influenced the design and tactics of post-war jet fighters worldwide. Allied engineers, having captured and studied the jets extensively at research facilities in both the United States and Britain, confirmed that while the basic design of the aircraft was fundamentally sound, the critical limiting factor was still engine technology. Early American jet aircraft, such as the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star and the Republic F-84 Thunderjet, as well as Soviet designs like the MiG-15, incorporated innovations and solutions to many of the problems identified during the study of the Me-262. These advancements included longer engine lifespans, improved throttle response, and increased reliability, all of which contributed to the evolution of more effective and dependable jet fighters in the years following the war. The development of the Messerschmitt Me-262 represented a significant technological leap in aviation, addressing many of the vulnerabilities encountered by earlier jet fighters and refining its design to maximize combat effectiveness. Engineers and pilots worked tirelessly to improve fuel efficiency, enabling the aircraft to sustain longer operational runs, while enhancements to the airframe's strength provided better protection against enemy fire. These improvements were carefully targeted at the weaknesses that Allied fighters had exploited in earlier encounters, making the Me-262 a more formidable adversary in the skies over Europe. Among the pilots who successfully engaged and shot down Me-262s, a select group earned a reputation for their exceptional skill and bravery. Their combat reports became highly valued, studied closely by intelligence analysts seeking to understand the tactics behind successful jet combat, and by flight instructors aiming to replicate those tactics in training new pilots. Beyond the well-known figures such as Urban Drew and Chuck Jagger, dozens of other pilots achieved jet kills through relentless perseverance and the application of innovative tactics developed through difficult, often perilous, experience. These pilots shared several distinctive qualities that set them apart. Many possessed extraordinary eyesight, allowing them to spot enemy aircraft at greater distances or in challenging conditions. Their gunnery skills were precise, honed through countless hours of practice, enabling them to hit fast-moving targets with deadly accuracy. They often displayed aggressive temperaments, driven by a fierce determination to neutralize the threat posed by the jets. Moreover, they were willing to accept high levels of risk, deliberately flying into heavily defended areas with dense flak, a task that demanded not just courage but a near-reckless willingness to confront danger head-on. Yet, despite the peril, these pilots repeatedly undertook such missions because they understood the critical strategic importance of eliminating the jet threat, an effort that could shift the balance of air superiority in favor of the Allies. The toll of these relentless engagements was heavy and felt on both sides of the conflict. American fighter pilots who attacked jet bases often met fiery ends far from home, their aircraft torn apart by anti-aircraft fire, crashing in flames in enemy territory. Sometimes, their bodies were never recovered from the wreckage, leaving families and military officials to mourn the loss of brave airmen who had sacrificed everything. On the German side, the loss of Me-262 pilots, the elite pilots trained to operate the most advanced aircraft, proved devastating for the Luftwaffe. Each pilot lost, whether killed in combat or captured, represented hundreds of hours of intensive training, millions of Reich marks invested in their development, and years of tactical experience accumulated through relentless practice and combat. The intense pressure of sustained combat and the constant danger contributed to a decline in the overall effectiveness of the German jet program. Mistakes in judgment increased as fatigue and stress took their toll, leading to accidents during critical phases such as takeoff and landing. As the war progressed into its final months, the infrastructure supporting the Me-262's operations began to break down. The production and maintenance facilities faced relentless Allied bombing campaigns, which targeted refineries and factories crucial for producing jet fuel and spare parts. As a result, access to essential resources diminished rapidly. Replacements for damaged engines and spare parts for aircraft systems became scarce, as factories were destroyed or fell into Allied hands. The supply chains that once supported regular maintenance and part replacement were severed, leaving the remaining aircraft increasingly unserviceable. Trained maintenance crews, vital for keeping the jets operational, were either killed in bombing raids or reassigned to ground combat units as Germany desperately mobilized its remaining manpower for the land war. Meanwhile, airfields, once established bases of operation, had to be abandoned or repurposed due to advancing Allied forces, and many were subjected to direct attack in ground assaults, further complicating efforts to sustain jet operations. By the early months of April in the year 1945, the Me-262 units were no longer operating from well-maintained airfields. Instead, they had been forced into makeshift runways, sections of autobahns, improvised strips, or even hiding aircraft within forests. Pilots worked under constant threat, flying on the brink of exhaustion and with minimal supplies, often in isolated groups operating independently of any central command. With key infrastructure collapsing, coordinated operations became impossible, and individual pilots flew missions as fuel and opportunity allowed. Some of them targeted strategic points or engaged Allied aircraft opportunistically, rather than executing well-planned attacks. As the situation deteriorated further, some pilots made the difficult decision to fly their jets into Allied-held territory with the hope of surrendering rather than continuing a seemingly hopeless fight. Others took their aircraft on final missions, fully aware that they would not return, choosing to face the end on their own terms rather than be captured or killed in the chaos of combat. The final weeks of the German jet program were marked by a series of scattered, largely uncoordinated sorties, each driven by the dwindling resources and the desperate desire to defend what remained of the Reich. Despite the dwindling numbers and mounting chaos, these pilots displayed extraordinary courage in the face of overwhelming the scarcity of fuel, and the risk of losing key airfields often limited the operational scope of Allied air campaigns, and at times, even the most advanced aircraft could not turn the tide due to these strategic constraints. Despite these obstacles, a handful of brave pilots, including members of units such as Jagdverband 44, managed to continue flying combat missions right up until the very last days of World War II. These pilots displayed remarkable resilience and skill, managing to score kills even as the German military infrastructure was crumbling under the weight of relentless Allied pressure. Their efforts underscored the persistent fighting spirit that characterized the final phase of the war, despite the collapse of the Nazi war machine. In the aftermath of the conflict, extensive analyses conducted by American and British aviation experts converged on a critical conclusion. The Messerschmitt Me-262 represented a groundbreaking technological milestone. This jet fighter was undeniably a leap forward in aeronautical engineering, embodying innovations that would influence aircraft design for decades to come. However, experts agreed that the timing of its introduction was simply too late to alter the overall outcome of the war. Various factors, including strategic delays and production issues, had hampered its potential impact, rendering it more of a technological marvel than a game-changer on the battlefield. Had Adolf Hitler not insisted on diverting production capacity toward bomber variants, and had engine reliability been more consistently high, the Me-262 might have played a more decisive role. Similarly, if Germany had been able to produce these jets in larger numbers, the impact could have been more substantial. Yet, the stark reality remained that by 1944, Germany was suffering from a severe shortage of fuel and trained pilots, which severely limited the operational deployment of the jet. Moreover, they lacked the air superiority necessary for safe and effective operation of high-performance aircraft like the Me-262. Their formidable Allied opponents had achieved overwhelming numerical superiority in the skies, making it nearly impossible for the jet to operate effectively without the required support infrastructure. Despite its impressive technical capabilities, the Me-262 was unable to surmount these larger strategic problems. Its limited deployment was not solely due to mechanical or performance issues but was fundamentally constrained by the broader context of wartime resource shortages and strategic disadvantages. The engagements between Me-262 fighters and American Mustangs extended well beyond the immediate scope of World War II, shaping air combat doctrines for generations. These encounters became a classic case study demonstrating that possessing superior technology does not automatically translate into guaranteed tactical success. This lesson became a cornerstone of military strategy, emphasizing that technological advantage must be complemented by tactically sound operations. The enduring influence of these lessons is evident in how air forces worldwide began to prioritize exploiting enemy vulnerabilities over merely engaging their strengths. Pilot training programs increasingly emphasized the importance of understanding enemy tactics, identifying weak points, and executing well-timed attacks. The recognition that even the most revolutionary aircraft systems could have exploitable flaws helped shape military planning and procurement strategies throughout the Cold War era and into modern times. American pilots, in particular, developed specific tactics to counter the Me-262's remarkable speed advantage. They learned to use altitude to their advantage, building speed during dives before attacking, timing their assaults during vulnerable phases of the enemy's flight profile, and maintaining persistent patrols over known German operating areas to intercept the jets before they could evade or reach their targets. Accounts from individual pilots of that turbulent period provide invaluable insights into both the psychological and tactical challenges faced during these high-stakes encounters. Chuck Jagger, in his autobiography and interviews, vividly described the intense concentration and calculated risks involved in engaging the Me-262. He explained that destroying these jets often required accepting extraordinary dangers and making rapid decisions based on imperfect information. Jagger recounted the tension of loitering near German airfields, knowing that enemy flak and fighters could strike at any moment, and the careful timing needed to dive at just the right moment to maximize speed and effectiveness. His reflections also highlighted the satisfaction of proving that American fighters, under skilled tactics, could overcome what seemed an almost invincible adversary. Urban Drew, who received recognition for his combat achievements only in 1983, shared his feelings of frustration over nearly 4 decades of having his victories unacknowledged and his heroism unrecognized. Nevertheless, Drew emphasized that his primary focus remained on fulfilling the mission, regardless of personal accolades. The importance of his and others' contributions extended beyond individual fame. Their efforts contributed valuable insights into combat tactics and aircraft performance, which would influence future generations of fighter pilots. The technical and operational lessons learned from the encounters with the Me-262 directly impacted aircraft development programs in the post-war era. One notable example was the development of the P-80 Shooting Star, America's first operational jet fighter, which entered service just as World War II drew to a close. Lockheed's engineers meticulously studied captured Me-262s, analyzing their engines, airframes, and systems to understand their strengths and limitations. These detailed examinations informed the design and engineering of subsequent American jet aircraft, allowing for improvements in speed, maneuverability, and reliability. The story of the Me-262 is a compelling tale of both remarkable achievement and undeniable limitations, illustrating how technological innovation alone cannot determine the outcome of warfare. This revolutionary aircraft marked a significant milestone as the world's first operational jet fighter, an achievement that unquestionably represented a major breakthrough in aviation history. The design of the P-80, which was inspired in part by the Me-262, sought to address some of the jet's most glaring weaknesses. It introduced longer-lasting engines with improved throttle response, directly targeting the critical flaws that had hampered the German aircraft. These modifications aimed not only to enhance performance but also to increase operational reliability in the field. Moreover, the revamped fuel efficiency of the P-80 extended its operational range well beyond the Me-262's maximum of about 650 miles, allowing for longer missions and greater strategic flexibility. The strengthening of landing gear was another notable improvement, as it contributed to a lower accident rate, which had been a persistent issue in German jet operations. Such safety enhancements made the aircraft more dependable during critical phases like takeoff and landing, where pilot situational awareness was vital. Better cockpit visibility further augmented pilot awareness, especially during these vulnerable moments, thus reducing the likelihood of accidents caused by blind spots or poor visibility. Meanwhile, Soviet engineers undertook rigorous studies of the Me-262's design and technology. They examined captured aircraft and engines that had been shipped to research facilities, where comprehensive testing provided valuable insights. The knowledge gained from these efforts significantly influenced the development of subsequent Soviet jet fighters, most notably the MiG-15 and Yak-15. In addition to studying captured German technology, Soviet designers also incorporated British engine technology through clandestine means, espionage and technology transfer, further accelerating their progress in jet aircraft development. This widespread analysis and adaptation of Me-262 technology, coupled with other sources of innovation, played a crucial role in the rapid dissemination of jet fighter knowledge worldwide. As a result, the transition from piston-powered fighters to jet propulsion gained momentum swiftly during the late 1940s and into the 1950s. Within a decade following the conclusion of World War II, propeller-driven fighters had become relics of the past, replaced almost entirely by jet-powered aircraft in the fleets of nearly every air force around the globe. The rapid adoption of jet technology underscored the profound impact of the Me-262's legacy, even if its operational history was somewhat mixed. Analyzing the final record of the aircraft's use reveals a nuanced picture. While the Me-262 achieved some tactical successes, it ultimately failed to produce a strategic advantage that could alter the overall course of the war. Individual pilots flying the jet scored impressive numbers of enemy aircraft, some reaching double-digit kills, and specific missions showcased the aircraft's impressive capabilities when conditions suited its strengths. Yet, Despite these notable achievements, the overall influence of the Me-262 on the broader scope of the conflict remained limited. Strategic bombing campaigns persisted unimpeded, and Allied fighters continued to dominate the skies, maintaining air superiority that allowed ground forces to press forward into German territory with reliable air support. The considerable resources invested in the development and production of the Me-262, ranging from scarce materials and manufacturing capacity to highly skilled labor, might have been better allocated. Instead of focusing on a relatively small number of advanced jets, Germany could have produced a larger fleet of conventional fighters. These more numerous aircraft, operated with the training and fuel supplies already available, might have posed a more sustained threat and provided greater tactical flexibility. The narrative of German pilots displaying their jets proudly in the face of advancing Allied forces, only to be intercepted and defeated by seasoned American Mustang aces during their most vulnerable moments, ultimately underscores the limitations of technological solutions when confronted with strategic and logistical realities. Germany's development of the Me-262 was undeniably a historic milestone, a genuine breakthrough in aviation technology that promised substantial tactical advantages. Yet, this achievement could not compensate for the fundamental disadvantages that ultimately doomed its impact. These included a shortage of numbers and resources, insufficient fuel supplies, limited trained personnel, and a strategic position that was steadily deteriorating. Despite possessing a marvel of engineering, the Germans found themselves overwhelmed by the combined might of Allied industrial capacity, extensive training systems, and superior logistical support. American and Allied pilots, flying aircraft that were less advanced but supported by overwhelming resources, persisted in their efforts through relentless innovation, tactical ingenuity, and unwavering professionalism. Their victories in the skies were not merely the result of equipment but also of the resilience and adaptability of their air forces. In the final analysis, the Me-262 stands as one of aviation history's most fascinating symbols of what might have been. It demonstrated the potential of jet technology and pointed toward the future of aerial combat. Yet, it arrived too late to alter the course of the war, serving more as a glimpse of what was to come rather than a decisive factor in the conflict's outcome. Its combat record, while impressive in certain engagements and in the hands of skilled pilots, proved insufficient to change the broader strategic balance. The American pilots, those who developed, refined, and executed tactics against this formidable aircraft, the strategies devised to counter the formidable jet threat in World War II etched their significance into aviation history not because of groundbreaking technological innovations alone, but primarily through tactical ingenuity, unwavering courage, and a steadfast refusal to relinquish tactical advantages to an enemy who seemed, at least at first glance, virtually invincible. These tactics, honed under extreme pressure, demonstrated that human skill, disciplined training, sound doctrine, inspired leadership, and relentless determination could, in many cases, counterbalance, or even outweigh, technological disparities on the battlefield. The remarkable success of these tactics served as a powerful validation of a fundamental principle: that human factors, when effectively harnessed, can overcome technological limitations. This was vividly illustrated during the fierce confrontations between the German Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighters and the American P-51 Mustangs. Within a span of less than a year, from October of the year 1944, when the first Me-262 was shot down by Allied fighters, to May of the following year, when the final jet operations in Germany ground to a halt, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. The rapidity of this transformation was not attributable to any single breakthrough but was instead the result of a cumulative process, involving systematic exploitation of the jet aircraft's vulnerabilities, combined with relentless Allied pressure that kept the Luftwaffe's jet operations from ever reaching sustainable levels. Every single Me-262 that was shot down during critical moments such as takeoff or landing represented one fewer aircraft available for intercepting Allied bombers, thereby reducing the threat to the vital strategic raids. Moreover, each pilot who was killed or captured carried with him a wealth of experience and training that could not be replaced overnight, further hampering German operational effectiveness. Allied attacks on jet bases, often swift and coordinated, forced the Germans to disperse their aircraft and reduce the coherence of their operations, which in turn diminished their tactical advantage. As the final months of the war drew near, the German pilots found themselves fighting with increasing desperation. Their situation was worsening as supply lines became strained and fuel shortages severely limited the number of sorties they could undertake. Mechanical issues with engines kept many jets grounded for long periods, while the threat posed by Allied fighter patrols made every takeoff and landing a potential hazard. Additionally, the repeated relocations of jet bases to evade Allied attacks disrupted both operational continuity and morale within the German ranks. Despite these overwhelming difficulties, some pilots continued to fly combat missions until the very last hours of the war. Their perseverance was extraordinary, reflecting a remarkable level of courage and professionalism in the face of almost insurmountable odds. These men understood well that victory was beyond reach, yet they chose to fly, driven by a complex mixture of duty, a sense of honor, and perhaps a hope that their sacrifices might somehow influence the broader outcome. The conclusion of this intense chapter in aviation history did not come with a dramatic final battle, but rather through an inexorable process of disintegration. As Germany's military infrastructure crumbled in early May of 1945, the once proud Me-262 jets were abandoned on airfields, hidden in woods to prevent their capture, or destroyed by their own crews to deny the enemy the spoils. A few aircraft managed to be flown into Allied territory and surrendered, but the majority simply ceased flying as fuel supplies dwindled and maintenance became impossible amid the chaos. The jets that had once symbolized Germany's technological aspiration to dominate the skies, promising to sweep Allied bombers from German airspace, ended their operational careers scattered across the landscape of a defeated nation. These silent remnants stood as poignant testaments to the enduring gap between technological potential and the harsh realities of operational combat. Meanwhile, the pilots flying the Mustang fighters, who had relentlessly hunted these jets, returned home as the war drew to a close, having achieved their mission, neutralizing the jet threat through tactical superiority. In the end, it was not technological superiority that decided the fate of these advanced aircraft, but the strategic and tactical prowess of the Allied forces. Their ability to adapt, exploit vulnerabilities, and maintain relentless pressure proved superior to the promise of technological innovation alone. The story of these aerial encounters remains a testament to the enduring power of human skill and tactical ingenuity in warfare. An enduring lesson that even the most advanced technology can be rendered ineffective without the guiding hand of disciplined strategy and resolute determination.